Flowers function to attract pollinators to allow for sexual reproduction in angiosperms. So here you've got the main structures of the flower, and there's four main organs. There's the sepal, which encloses the blossom before it actually blooms to help protect it. We have the petals, which are usually brightly colored. Sometimes they're not, but those are going to help to attract pollinators. And then we have the male and female sexual organs. So we have the male microsporophyll, and this is diploid, so this is still part of the sporophyte generation, which is made up of the stamen, which is going to be a filament, and the anther. And the anther is actually where the male microspores are being produced. And then we have the female megasporophyll, which is the carpel or pistil, which is made up of three main parts. We've got the stigma, that's sticky, the style, which is the tube that help hold up the stigma, as well as the ovary. So we can have the ovary can be a single ovule, or in this case you can see there's 6 ovules in here. A complete flower has all 4 of these floral organs, and an incomplete flower might lack one of them. So for an example, an incomplete floral flower might have petals and sepals and stigma, but no stamens. Complete flowers usually go to some effort to make sure that they don't pollinate themselves, because that doesn't allow for a lot of diversity. So you can see how the stigma is up above the stamen, so it's not likely that the pollen is going to blow all the way up to that. A cluster of flower is called an inflorescence. So if you look at a pineapple actually grows from many different flowers together, and so that fruit is the result of an inflorescence. The female megasporophyll can exist in several different types of. A carpel is specifically a single stigma, style, and ovary. Sometimes this can be called a pistil. So a pistil can be a single carpel or multiple carpels together. This is a simple carpel or a simple pistil. This case has 3 separate carpels, 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 3 pistils. Down here, so we have a compound pistil. So this is going to have 3 stigmas, and each of those leads to a style and an ovary. So this would be 3 carpels, but because they are fused together, this is technically 1 pistil. Same thing here, where we have 3 lobes of each carpel, but it's compound together into 1 compound pistil, and you can see that they're kind of fused and they share these ovary walls. I'm not too worried about the distinction between pistil and carpel, as long as you use one of those terms to refer to the female reproductive organs in a flower. That should be okay. Pollination is the process of getting male pollen to the female stigma. So we're going to move from the male anther, where we're going to make the pollen grains, to the female stigma. This is not the same thing as fertilization. We're just moving from the male organ to the female organ. We haven't actually combined gametes into a zygote yet. There are a lot of trees that use wind to disperse pollen, and if you have allergies, you're more than well aware of this in the spring. So about 20% of trees are going to disperse pollen through wind. This is actually fairly efficient. Wind tunnel studies have shown that this tends to be pretty efficient. This usually happens in early spring. This is good because we're just coming out of winter. There aren't as many tree leaves in the way, and so the wind can carry the pollen a little bit further. Some aquatic plants use water to distribute pollen, but most plants, so about 65%, Most plants use some species of animal, so an insect or bird, and most of those require insects. The biggest insect pollinator is the bee, and bees typically are drawn to flowers that have nectar for food, which emit a sweet fragrance. Often those flowers are typically yellow or blue, but not red, and they can often have UV markings. So right here we've got the same flower. This yellow flower is what's seen with the normal color spectrum, but under a UV light you can see this red dot. It's kind of like a target to be able to tell a bee this has nectar here. Moths and butterflies, so here's a moth, are typically going to pollinate at night. So often those flowers are like yellow or white because they're easy to see at night, as well as the fact that those animals are colorblind and so they don't need to be brightly colored. Same thing with bats. Bats are nocturnal, so those colors tend to be aromatic to draw the bat in, but also lightly colored to stand out against the dark night. Birds are drawn to very large flowers that tend to be brightly colored. Birds don't have a very great sense of smell, so they're going to use vision to hone in on things like bright reds. And then flies, so here's a blowfly, they're often attracted to red, fleshy looking flowers that have a rotten meat smell. So this rotten smell will attract the fly and trick it into mistaking it for rotten flesh, but at the same time the fly pollinates the flower and moves on. The larvae hatch, there's no meat, and they die, so no harm to the plant, but the plant got some pollen on the blowfly and it transferred it to a different plant. So plants and animals have been co-evolving as pollinators or herbivores for a long time. Darwin, when he went to Madagascar, found this Madagascar flower that had this really long receptacle here, which is where the nectar is. And he hypothesized that they would find a moth that had a proboscis that matched this receptacle, because the only reason a flower would grow this long is because it had a pollinator. And Darwin didn't find it, but about 2 decades after he died, this moth was discovered, and you can look and see here's this long proboscis, and it is the exact right shape and size to fit into that flower to collect nectar. Species also co-evolved between herbivores and plants. So caterpillars and butterflies notoriously are herbivores. Caterpillars, if you've never seen, can eat a plant all the way down to the ground, so they're pretty destructive if you're a plant. So caterpillars tend to eat leaves. Over time, plants have started to adapt to be poisonous. So a plant that has a toxin that prevents caterpillars from eating it is going to be selected for. And then in response to that, caterpillars that are resistant to that toxin would get selected for. So now we have a toxic plant that only one toxic-resistant caterpillar can eat. Plants have also developed egg mimics. So these little spots on the leaf to a butterfly look like eggs. So that actually might help prevent a butterfly from laying its eggs on that leaf and allow that plant to go uneaten by caterpillars. Some plants, if they feel the weight of a leaf is too heavy because a butterfly laid a lot of eggs on them, they can actually drop that leaf. They can abscise it and drop that leaf so that those caterpillars don't actually hatch and cause damage to the plant.